My roommate's boyfriend moved in without paying rent for 6 months and screamed in my face because I politely asked him to stop snoring. I've lived with Claire for 3 years and we had this perfect setup. Split a 2-bedroom near downtown, she worked days at a bank, I did night shifts at the hospital plus online classes. We barely saw each other, but when we did, we'd have wine and catch up like old times. The apartment ran like clockwork. Then 6 months ago, Claire started dating Mike. First few weeks he'd come over for dinner sometimes, maybe stay the night on weekends. That was fine. But within a month, Mike practically lived there. His toothbrush in our bathroom, his clothes in her closet, his leftovers filling our fridge. He worked at some accounting firm 10 minutes away, so our place became his personal hotel. Claire kept saying it was temporary while he looked for a new apartment closer to work. 6 months later, still looking apparently. Mike was actually okay when Claire was around. He'd joke around, bring takeout for everyone, even fixed our sink once. But when they fought, which was every other day, he'd sulk in the living room playing video games at full volume. And the snoring. This man sounded like a chainsaw going through concrete. My room shared a wall with Claire's and I'd hear him every single night. I tried everything. White noise machine, earplugs, meditation apps. Nothing worked. I'd mentioned it to Claire twice and she'd apologize, but nothing changed. Last Tuesday, I had a huge exam the next morning. Studied until midnight, set 3 alarms, really needed the sleep. 2 a.m. and Mike's snoring literally shook the wall. I knocked gently. Nothing. Knocked harder. Nothing. Finally opened their door and said, "Hey Mike, you're snoring pretty loud. Just wanted to let you know." Didn't yell, didn't insult him, just stated a fact. He rolled over, and it stopped. Next morning, I'm in the kitchen making coffee and eggs for my early shift. Mike storms in at 6:30 looking possessed. Starts screaming that I'm a selfish bitch, that I had no right to enter their room, that my alarm woke him up so now we're even. I said, "Mike, you don't pay rent here." He said Claire pays for both of them. I said that's not how roommate agreements work. He got in my face, like 2 inches away, spit flying, saying I was jealous of their relationship and trying to break them up. I grabbed my bag and left, but I was shaking. Called my brother Tony on the way to work. Tony's a paralegal and knows tenant law inside and out. He said Mike had 0 rights to be there more than 14 consecutive days according to our lease. Also said what Mike did could be considered assault. I didn't want police involved, so Tony suggested another route. Turns out our building manager Gloria was super strict about unauthorized tenants because of insurance liability. Tony helped me write up a formal complaint about a non-tenant who'd been staying over 6 months, was verbally aggressive to a legal tenant, and created disturbances. Included dates, times, everything. Gloria was pissed. Not at me, at Claire for violating the lease. She gave Claire 48 hours notice that Mike was banned from the property, or she'd start eviction proceedings. Claire came home crying that afternoon, begging me to talk to Gloria. Said Mike didn't mean it, he was just tired, he had nowhere else to go. I asked her if she knew he screamed in my face. She said I probably misunderstood his tone. That's when I knew she'd picked him over our friendship. I told her Gloria's decision was final, and if Mike stepped foot in the building, Gloria would call the cops for trespassing. Mike tried to come over that night. Gloria was waiting in the lobby with the building security guard. He threw a whole tantrum about his rights, threatened to sue everyone. The security guard just held up the no trespass order and Mike had to leave. Claire moved out 2 weeks later to live with Mike at his place 40 minutes from her job. She said I ruined her life over something petty. I said Mike ruined our friendship by thinking he owned a place he didn't pay for. My new roommate Jess is amazing. She's quiet, clean, and her girlfriend brings us homemade cookies every Sunday. Then one day the security guard told me Mike tried coming back. Alexander caught me in the lobby the next morning as I dragged myself home from my shift. He pulled me aside near the mailboxes and kept his voice low. Mike had tried getting into the building around midnight by following another resident through the door. Alexander stopped him right there in the lobby. Mike said he just needed to grab some stuff he'd left behind. Alexander checked the security log on his tablet and showed Mike that Claire had already retrieved everything 2 weeks ago when she moved out. Mike's whole story fell apart right there. He started yelling about how Alexander was harassing him and threatening to call the police. Alexander actually laughed because the whole thing was on camera, including Mike trying to tailgate through a secure door. Alexander said Mike finally left after realizing the cops wouldn't side with someone violating a property ban. I thanked Alexander and headed upstairs. My apartment door had an envelope taped to it with my name in Claire's handwriting. I peeled it off and went inside, dropping my bag on the floor. 3 pages fell out when I opened it. Claire's neat cursive covered every line. She explained that Mike had been sleeping in his car some nights because his apartment was too far from work. She begged me to let him use our old couch just on nights when he worked late. The letter went on about how hard things were for them, how the ban was making everything worse, how I could help fix this if I just talked to Gloria. I took photos of each page and texted them to Tony. His response came back fast. Document everything. Do not respond to Claire directly. I put the letter in a folder with all the other stuff I'd been saving. 2 days later, I was in the middle of my online class when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail and kept taking notes on the lecture. After class ended, I played the message. Mike's voice came through my speaker saying he knew I was home because he could see my car in the parking lot. He just wanted 5 minutes to apologize and explain his side. My stomach dropped. He'd been watching the building, watching for my car. I forwarded the voicemail to Gloria and Tony immediately. Tony called back within minutes asking if I was okay and telling me not to leave my apartment until he heard back from Gloria. Gloria called less than an hour later. She was escalating this to the landlord because Mike's behavior had crossed into stalking. She asked if I wanted to file a police report. I hesitated. Part of me still felt guilty about how everything went down. Tony texted while I was still on the phone with Gloria. That guilt is exactly what Mike and Claire are counting on. I told Gloria I'd think about the police report and let her know. Jess came home that evening and found me stressed on the couch with my textbooks spread around me but not actually studying. I ended up telling her everything about the voicemail and Mike watching the building. She got protective immediately. Her girlfriend Priscilla's brother was a lawyer who handled restraining orders. Did I want an introduction? I was surprised. We'd only lived together 3 weeks and she was already jumping in to help. I said yes, and she texted Priscilla right there. The next morning, I woke up to 7 missed calls from Claire and a bunch of texts. Mike got fired from his accounting job for missing too many days. It was my fault because the stress of being banned from our building made him depressed and unable to focus at work. I'd ruined his career and his life. The least I could do was talk to Gloria about lifting the ban. The texts kept going. How could I be so cruel? Did I even care about what I was doing to them? 3 years of friendship meant nothing to me, apparently. I screenshot every single message and sent them to Tony. He responded immediately. This is harassment. Block her number right now. Instead, I typed out one response. Mike's job performance is not my responsibility, and I won't be discussing this further. I hit send and then blocked both Claire and Mike's numbers. It felt harsh, but also like finally closing a door that should have been closed months ago. 3 days passed quietly. I started to relax. Maybe blocking them actually worked. Then I was at the hospital during my shift, and the front desk paged me. I had a visitor. I went down to the lobby and Claire was standing there crying. She'd followed my work schedule that she remembered from when we were friends. She ambushed me at my job. Mike moved back in with his parents 2 hours away, and their relationship was falling apart. She needed to talk to me. I told Claire she needed to leave because I was working, and this wasn't appropriate. She started getting louder. I owed her a conversation after 3 years of friendship. A security guard approached and asked if there was a problem. I said yes. This person is harassing me, and I need her removed from the building. Claire looked absolutely shocked, like she genuinely believed our old friendship would override everything that happened. The guard asked Claire to come with him, and she started crying harder, but she left. I was shaking so hard I had to sit in the break room for 20 minutes before I could go back to my patients. My supervisor found me there and asked if I was okay. I explained the whole situation because I was worried Claire might try coming back. My supervisor was incredibly supportive. She added a note to my file that Claire was not authorized to visit me at work. She also said if Claire showed up again, security would call the police immediately. I felt relieved but also exhausted. This whole thing just kept escalating no matter what I did. That night, Jess texted Priscilla about everything, and within an hour, I got a message from someone named Cormac. He said he was Priscilla's brother and heard I was dealing with some harassment issues. Could we meet tomorrow evening to talk about my options? I agreed, and we set up a time at a coffee shop near the apartment. The next evening, I showed up with a folder containing everything I'd saved. Screenshots of Claire's texts, recordings of Mike's voicemails, photos of the envelope taped to my door, the incident report from the hospital security about Claire's visit. Cormac was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, wearing jeans and a button-up shirt. He shook my hand, and we sat down with our coffees. He asked me to walk him through the whole timeline starting from when Mike first moved in. I went through everything chronologically while he took notes on a legal pad. When I got to the part about Mike watching the building and leaving the voicemail saying he could see my car, Cormac stopped writing and looked up. He asked if I still had that voicemail, and I played it for him right there. He listened twice and made several more notes. Then he went through my folder piece by piece, reading every text from Claire, listening to every voicemail from Mike. The whole review took almost 40 minutes. Finally, he set down his pen and explained how restraining orders worked in our state. I'd need to file for harassment orders against both of them since they were acting together. The temporary orders would get approved pretty quickly based on the evidence I had, especially the workplace ambush and the stalking behavior outside my building. Then there'd be a hearing in about 3 weeks where a judge would decide on permanent orders. Cormac said my case was strong because I had documentation of repeated boundary violations after clear warnings, escalating behavior, and incidents at both my home and workplace. The idea of going to court made my stomach hurt. I asked what would happen at the hearing, and Cormac explained that both Mike and Claire would be there. We'd all present our evidence to the judge, and then the judge would make a ruling. He said he could come with me as support, even though he wouldn't be representing me officially since these hearings were usually informal. I felt relieved knowing I wouldn't be alone. Cormac walked me through what I needed to include in the filing paperwork and said he'd help me fill everything out. We spent another hour at the coffee shop going through the forms line by line. 2 days later, I was home studying for an anatomy exam when my phone rang with Gloria's number. She sounded irritated when I answered. Mike had shown up at the building again that afternoon around 2 o'clock when Alexander wasn't working. The daytime security guard almost let him in before thinking to check the banned tenant list. Mike had this whole prepared story about needing to get important work documents he'd left in the apartment months ago. He seemed genuinely shocked when the guard told him he was banned from the property. Gloria said the guard handled it perfectly and made Mike leave immediately, but she wanted me to know what happened. I thanked her for calling and mentioned I was filing for restraining orders the next morning. Gloria said that was smart and she'd make sure all the security staff had copies once the orders were active. After we hung up, I sat there staring at my textbook without actually reading it. Mike wasn't going to stop. He really believed he had some right to access our building, to my space, even after everything that happened. The next morning, Cormac met me at the courthouse and we filed the paperwork together for harassment restraining orders against both Mike and Claire. The clerk reviewed everything and said the temporary orders were approved immediately. They'd be served within 48 hours, and my court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Cormac explained again that once they got served, any contact from either of them would violate the order, and I should call the police right away. He also said that third-party contact counted, like if their friends or family reached out on their behalf. I felt weird walking out of the courthouse knowing that in 2 days there would be legal consequences if they kept harassing me. It made everything feel more real and serious. Mike got served first since he was staying with his parents about 2 hours away. I know because exactly 2 hours after the process server logged the delivery, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail and then listened with my heart pounding. It was a woman's voice saying she was Mike's mother, and she was very disappointed in me for taking legal action against her son, who was going through such a difficult time right now. Couldn't we just sit down and resolve this like adults instead of involving the courts? She said Mike made a mistake, but he was really sorry, and this restraining order was going to ruin his life. I saved the voicemail and immediately sent it to Cormac. He texted back within minutes saying this absolutely counted as violating the order through a third party and actually strengthened my case. He said to save any other messages but don't respond to anything. Claire got served the next day at the apartment she was sharing with Mike. According to the notes the process server filed with the court, she answered the door and broke down crying when she read the paperwork. She kept saying she didn't understand why I was doing this to her. The server noted that a male matching Mike's description was visible inside the apartment but didn't come to the door. Reading those notes made me feel strange. Part of me felt genuinely sad about how completely our friendship had fallen apart. 3 years of living together, all those wine nights and late conversations, all the times we'd supported each other through hard things. But mostly I just felt relieved. Finally, there were actual legal consequences for them continuing to push boundaries after I'd asked them to stop so many times. Maybe now they'd actually leave me alone. The 3 weeks before the court hearing were the most peaceful I'd had in months. No phone calls from unknown numbers. No surprise visits to my building or workplace. No manipulative texts. Just quiet, normal life. Jess and I fell into this easy routine where we'd both study in the living room some evenings, her working on her nursing prerequisites while I reviewed for my hospital certification exams. We respected each other's space naturally without having to negotiate everything. Priscilla came over most Sundays with fresh cookies, and the 3 of us would watch movies together. One night while Priscilla was in the bathroom, Jess told me she was really glad she took the room after Claire left. She'd been nervous about it because the previous roommate leaving so suddenly seemed like a red flag, but living with me had been great. I told her the feeling was completely mutual. Sitting there on our couch with my textbooks spread around me and Jess laughing at something on her phone, it hit me how much energy I'd been spending for months just managing Claire and Mike's dysfunction. All that stress and anxiety and walking on eggshells trying not to upset them. Now I just came home and it was peaceful. The morning of the court hearing, I woke up anxious and couldn't eat breakfast. I'd organized all my documentation in a binder with tabs for different categories of evidence. Voicemails in one section, text messages in another, incident reports from Gloria and my hospital supervisor in a third. Cormac had told me to be over-prepared because judges appreciated thorough documentation. I got to the courthouse 30 minutes early and sat in the hallway outside the courtroom going through everything one more time. Cormac showed up 15 minutes before the hearing with his own copy of my evidence binder. He said he'd reviewed everything again last night and I had a really solid case. When they called my case, we walked into the courtroom and I saw Mike sitting with 2 older people who had to be his parents. Claire was there too, but sitting separately a few rows behind them. They all looked shocked when they saw me walk in with Cormac. The judge was an older woman who seemed tired but focused. She reviewed my evidence binder carefully, reading through several of the text messages, and listening to 2 of the voicemails on the courtroom's audio system. Then she asked Mike if he wanted to present anything in his defense. He stood up and started saying he never actually threatened me. He was just trying to have a conversation, and I was overreacting to everything. The judge cut him off and pointed out that stalking behavior and repeated boundary violations after being explicitly banned from a property constituted harassment regardless of whether he made explicit threats. She asked Claire if she had anything to add, and Claire just shook her head while crying. The judge granted permanent restraining orders for 1 year against both of them. No contact, direct or indirect. They had to stay at least 100 yards away from me, my home, and my workplace. The judge said if either of them violated the order, I should call police immediately, and they'd face criminal charges. After the hearing, I walked out to the parking lot feeling shaky and relieved at the same time. I was almost to my car when I heard Claire call my name. I turned around and she was walking toward me quickly. Cormac stepped between us before she got close and reminded her that the restraining order was now active and she needed to leave immediately. Claire stopped but kept talking, saying she just wanted to understand why I hated her so much. Tears were running down her face and her voice was getting louder. She said we were best friends for 3 years, and she didn't understand how I could do this to her over a few misunderstandings. Cormac repeated that she needed to leave and pulled out his phone like he was going to call the police. Claire finally turned around and walked back toward the courthouse. Watching her go, I realized she genuinely couldn't see it. She couldn't see how choosing Mike over and over again, excusing his behavior, enabling him to violate my boundaries, showing up at my workplace, all of it had destroyed our friendship. In her mind, I was the villain for enforcing consequences. 2 months passed without a single incident. No contact attempts, no voicemails, no surprise visits. Just normal, quiet life. My grades started improving because I was actually sleeping through the night without Mike's snoring shaking the wall. Work felt less stressful because I wasn't constantly anxious about confrontations when I got home. Jess and I became actual friends instead of just cordial roommates. We'd cook dinner together sometimes and talk about real things, not just surface-level apartment logistics. One evening, she told me she'd been really worried about moving in after Claire left so suddenly, but I'd turned out to be the best roommate she'd ever had. That made me feel good in a way I hadn't expected. The whole situation with Claire and Mike had made me question whether I was actually a difficult person to live with. But Jess showed me that normal roommates could respect boundaries and share space without constant drama. Then one afternoon, I got a call from Cormac saying he had a letter for me that came through his office. It was from Claire asking if we could talk after the restraining order expired in 10 months. She said she and Mike had broken up for good, and she'd moved back to an apartment closer to her bank job. She was seeing a therapist now and working on her codependency issues. The letter actually sounded sincere and self-aware in a way Claire had never been before. She acknowledged that she'd chosen Mike over our friendship repeatedly, and that she'd enabled his bad behavior instead of holding him accountable. She said she understood if I never wanted to speak to her again, but she hoped maybe someday we could at least have coffee and talk. Reading it, I felt surprised that I wasn't angry anymore, just sad about everything we'd lost. I sat with Claire's letter for 2 days before I finally drafted a response. Kept it short and sent it through Cormac like he suggested. I told her I appreciated that she was getting help and working on herself. That took real courage. But I wasn't interested in rebuilding what we had. Too much trust got broken when she chose Mike over our friendship again and again, when she showed up at my workplace after I asked for space, when she couldn't see how her enabling hurt me. I'd moved forward with my life and I was doing really well now. Cormac read my response before sending it and said it was perfect, kind, but firm. Setting that boundary without guilt felt surprisingly good, like closing a door that should have stayed closed months ago. 6 months after everything started with Mike's snoring shaking my wall, I'm sitting in my quiet apartment with my textbooks spread across the coffee table studying for finals. Jess is in the kitchen baking cookies with Priscilla and their laughter drifts over while I highlight notes about cardiovascular systems. My phone rings and it's Tony checking in like he does every few weeks. I tell him I'm doing really well, better than I have in years actually. My grades are up because I'm sleeping through the night. Work feels manageable because I'm not constantly stressed about what I'll come home to. Jess and Priscilla are talking about getting a cat and asked if I'd be okay with it. Standing up for myself was hard and messy and cost me a 3-year friendship, but it taught me something important. I deserve roommates who respect my space and my boundaries. I deserve to feel safe and comfortable in my own home. Sometimes the best outcome isn't reconciliation or fixing what's broken. Sometimes it's just peace.